Animals sold in a so-called wet market in China.
All steps for man, science for mankind.
Oh man, do we have a special treat for you today on Conspiracy Conversations? Somebody that's not only dug in deep in one area of this, but in many, and has made a life out of fleshing things out, and not saying, hey, who's right and who's wrong, but like, hey, here's what happened. Here's where the money went. Here's who paid who, and here's what they created. And we're going to talk today about this connection between Hollywood and Washington D.C. Between Washington D.C. and Hollywood. And breaking it down, I got to do this at the beginning of every single episode because you may come into this thinking Rubik's Cubes are green and you got it all figured out. And you're going to fight with anybody that tells you that they're not green. And it's not that they're wrong, and it's not that you're wrong, but you might have come in today's episodes thinking they're green. And today we might just rotate it a little bit and like show you this side here. And you're like, oh my gosh, I can no longer deny that Rubik's Cubes are red. They're green and red. They're green and they're red. And I got it figured out. And you're going to go tell all your family and everybody at the water cooler and everywhere else, Rubik's Cubes are green and red. And so at least you're on a path, and that's where I'm trying to be. It's like, hey, I don't know if I know all six sides of this, but I want to dedicate some time. And I think we all are at a place now when you look at, hey, Joe Rogan took horse dewormer and Sanjay Gupta is like, hey, they almost act like they're sad the guy didn't die, over it. I would consider that a conspiracy theory. And so we're going to kind of start peeling these things back week by week. We've talked about the shape of the earth and cosmology. We've talked about the book of Enoch. We've talked about Nephilims and giant bones. And it's like, is that real? Is it not real? And so my goal is to bring on somebody that's done over 10,000 of hours of work in private to be able to come on here and share what they know on that topic. And without any further ado, this show is basically started with this guest in mind. He's one of my favorite guests we've had on in the past, one of my favorite people. He brings a lot of wisdom, calm, and peace into every single situation. And just get ready to be blessed. You might want to get a pen out and a paper because you're going to learn some stuff that you thought you knew, and you might need to unlearn a few things as well. The one, the only, Mr. Sean Stone.
Nice, very nice. Thank you so much for having me again. It's been fun. It's always fun to come on the show with you.
Oh, we learn a lot. I'm excited to get into today's. You've done a whole series on the best kept secrets, and I think we're going to continue kind of revisiting those and putting them out. There's stuff that comes out on a regular basis. There's a thing with Ricky Schroeder that came out in the last day or so, a video that he posted of a story from when he was younger, and it's like, oh, that makes a lot of sense through the lens of the things that you've already uncovered. And so the things that you've done in the past really age well. Like truth.
I've been doing this work for over a decade now. I mean, it's literally been, you could say I started in college because I did my New World Order thesis that became my book, right? On exactly that topic, one world government, the New World Order, consolidation of power through finance and politics, education. So that was my research in college. And then, going into like conspiracy theory was back in 2011, 2012. So, I've been doing interviews with conspiracy theory, Buzzsaw, Watching the Hawks and RT, my documentaries, my feature films, all of it. It's like, it's been over a decade now.
And, for those of you that don't know or haven't put the two and two together, your father's Oliver Stone. And, while incredible movies and entertainment in the past that used that platform to make people think in a really powerful way. He wasn't just like, hey, here's, some sugar pills to take to entertain you for a minute, like legitimate nutrients inside of what he was offering. I think his best work was with Ukraine on Fire and became very relevant, over the last year and a half for people to kind of, wow, this is kind of what's going on. And it didn't start 5 minutes ago. We're kind of dealing with things that have been going on for a while. And he does a great job in that documentary of putting that out and making that available.
No, I agree. That was a good, he's done so many documentaries and feature films. The Ukraine on Fire one obviously has gotten a lot of attention and play ever since last year, which is great, because most people in America probably never even, they thought of Ukraine with, I don't know, good-looking girls and models, and that was about it.
Right.
Nobody thought of the Ukraine before. So I think that documentary helped to contextualize the conflict that's been building there the last couple of decades.
It's unbelievable. So, I don't know how that all influenced you and what you guys, sat around talking about over, when you guys were eating your hamburger helper, or whatever you guys had growing up, your meatloaf on a Tuesday night in the Stone House, what that was all about, or whatever you guys did. But that had to have created some interesting conversations, meeting interesting people, the kind of topics. Your dad does not seem like the kind of guy that just hears something and like, oh, that's interesting, and go on. Like he probably knows like at least four sides of this thing pretty well, I would imagine.
He knows, he knows what he knows. I mean, I think people are familiar with, as I said, like a lot of his documentaries, his work. He's fascinated by history, especially the history of his time period, as he's focused on, as you see in most of his movies. There are reflections of the boomer generation, right? From the Vietnam War, from the Kennedy assassination, the Vietnam War, the Doors, into the 80s with Wall Street and Scarface, and into the 90s with Natural Born Killers and Naked on Sunday, all the way up to Snowden. It's like, he really is a socio-political filmmaker.
Well, we'll kind of get into the history of this, and I kind of got it laid out a whole series of questions and some things to get into, but you bring out a piece in documentary that you made called Washington, D.C. about people don't realize Katy Perry got paid $80,000 to perform for the Clintons. It's like the use of entertainment and everything that comes with, like their name, their recognition, all the feel good vibes that person might have. Like that's not natural or organic. That's not like, oh, she just had a free night and I'm passionate about it. Like there's a lot of money in this mix between celebrities and politics, between Hollywood and to say Hollywood, LA, entertainment, Nashville just as well, and DC.
Yeah, Hollywood, DC is the name. Not, you said Washington, DC. I think.
I'm sorry, Hollywood and DC. My bad. Thank you.
Hollywood, DC is the name of the documentary, right? Washington, DC would be pretty boring. Hollywood, DC. That's a documentary I made a few years ago, actually, and people who have seen Out of Shadows, perhaps, which is a great documentary that came out in 2020.
Phenomenal.
And a lot of the groundwork was laid in Hollywood, DC. I would say Hollywood, DC is like the prelude or chapter 1, and then watch Out of Shadows as chapter 2. But we go into, where do you want to start? We really are just trying to get across to people this notion that film media, it's politicized. There is an agenda in terms of the overall narratives that are being pushed for the most part. Again, like people will say like, well, does that mean Oliver Stone is a CIA agent? It's like, I think that there are people that have enough influence and power to maybe create counter myths, right? Or to do things that are perhaps a little bit independent of the system. But for the most part, the nature of the system is pushing certain ideologies across certain, how do you say? It's worldview warfare, at its heart. And so how infiltrated, is mainstream Hollywood? Ben Affleck himself, when he was making Argo, said like, I'm sure there are lots of CIA agents all over Hollywood, right? And just really, we don't think about it for the most part or know it. But it was very clear, and that's, you mentioned the opening of the documentary, and we talk about how Michelle Obama gave the award for Best Picture to Argo, which is basically a pro-CIA movie. Right. And a lot of it is fictionalized, as every Hollywood film is.
And then the tie-in between all that, there's the clip right there of Michelle giving out the awards. So that this tie-in between the White House and then a film that is filmed actually documenting going all the way back to Reagan and his, for those that don't remember, with the hostages being held, like them continuing to be held until after the inauguration, until after he takes position, which
That was the October surprise
The
that
October
aligned
surprise,
with.
yeah.
There's very good evidence that exactly the Bush, especially the people around Bush, but it was the Reagan Bush ticket, had people like William Casey and others who were in, and Casey became the head of the CIA once Reagan took office,
Mhm.
that were involved with negotiating with the Iranians to basically hold the hostages until after the election. And then, of course, as you said, they were released literally, I think, during the inauguration of
Bada
Reagan, right?
boom. It's hard telling. I got Reagan here, got a bobblehead, and I've named my dog after Reagan. People know this show. He's a Doberman. It's like, it's just so many great feel good things of my childhood, connected to him and all this stuff. And it's like, man, it's hard to say where my thoughts begin and the media's thoughts started and how much of even what's in here, was put there. I joke with my daughter is 26. She's awesome redhead. She used to do this thing a lot of like, we'd even say we're at church, and you'd be singing or something. She'd kind of lean over to me and be like, Mom's had a really busy week. I think she'd like to probably be taken out for lunch today, like maybe Chinese food or something. And I'd be like, shh, kind of thing. And for sure enough, by the time we'd be leaving, I'd be like hungry for Chinese food. I'd be like, hey, we should probably go out for Chinese day. And sometimes I'd wonder, like, how much of this do I really want? How much did she just plant in my head? She understood that as a child, like just subtle, just little, you don't have to be overt about it. Don't make a big thing. Just kind of let's plant the seed and then just kind of see where things go. And I think it's crazy. One time I was at the grocery store. I was doing triathlons at the time. My son and I were watching a lot of the Tour de France when Lance Armstrong was kind of at his peak. This is the mid 2000s. And they had all these commercials, Lance Armstrong drinking this low carb beer. And I don't even drink beer. I don't like beer. I don't even like the smell of it. I'm at the grocery store and I buy this 12-pack glass thing bottles of like Michelob Ultra or something. It was like this low carb beer. And my wife goes, "You're buying beer." She went against it. Like, we like wine, it's fine. But she's like, "You're buying beer." I said, "Yeah, I don't know, try it." Like the commercials with Lance Armstrong, like training. He's out with his friends and they would toast to a bottle of this low carb beer. We lived in Nashville like 2 more years until we eventually moved from there. And she jokingly was still in the back of the fridge. She goes, "Hey, Lance, are you gonna finish up this beer? Should we go ahead and throw it away now?" Because I had drank like half of a bottle. I hated it. It was nasty. But I'm like, that's how powerful that messaging is. It got somebody who doesn't even like beer to go buy a low carb beer.
Yeah, yeah, it's messaging. There's a quote in the documentary from one of these great marketing gurus, and he's like, the power of television is such that if people see something that's in the real world that contradicts what they see on the television, they will basically deny what they see in the real world.
Yeah,
Because
Hal
it
Becker, I
doesn't
wrote
fit
that one down. I think we got that image. We should show people that quote because that was really intentional. It says, "I know the secret of making the average American believe anything I want him to. Just let me control television. You put something on the television and it becomes reality." And then here's what's powerful. If the world outside of the TV set contradicts the images, people start trying to change the world to make it like the TV set images.
And let's think of what has happened, right? In these past, we can obviously point to any number of things, but I think most clearly it's like during the COVID era when, people were like literally cowering in terror and just watching
Yeah.
the numbers of deaths or even just the number of cases, right? At one point when there weren't enough deaths to scare people. So it was
Right.
the case epidemic, they called it. And literally people would, walk around with their masks in total fear of something that, would never really affect the majority of them, and would certainly never kill the vast majority of them. So it was reminded me of, a lot of the era of the 2000s when terror, when the government was utilizing the terrorism, alerts, red, remember on the TV set, red
Orange,
alerts,
red,
orange, yellows, and how much that affected the psyche of that time period. People were all for, wars against, Afghanistan and then Iraq. And it was all this, idea of like, let's go get the terrorists. And realistically, if you're talking about combating terrorism, well, it's not as cinematic as going and destroying countries. It's much more, if you really had wanted to do it properly, which I don't believe they did, because ultimately the elite are so in bed with the how do you say, with these operations, right? Essentially, these
Yeah.
operations are utilized for mind control purposes, financial control purposes, um, very particular reasons. I would say within most terror attacks are actually orchestrated for a much more particular point. That's that is not what is told to you by the television set. So if you really had wanted to go after terrorism, you go after the financing sources, right? Who are,
Yeah.
which oftentimes was like through Saudi Arabia, or even but also through like UBS, for example, which I know the Scott Bennett was trying to blow the whistle. We interviewed him. He's been around for many years talking about the terror financing that was going on through UBS, right, the Swiss bank,
Hmm.
and obviously, that's not just an accident that you have very influential people and not just Saudis, who are basically overseeing these operations. I think it came to the fore for most American, not most, but let's say a lot of Americans started to wake up during the ISIS era when they realized, okay, so you guys blew up Libya and then you basically set up a supply chain of money and guns, right, to create this new jihadi group that just came out of nowhere with all these, state of the art weapons and jeeps and, this whole like financial pipeline to ISIS, right?
Right.
Against your enemy, and then literally, the leaking of documents and emails and things saying like, ISIS is on our side. So all of a sudden, I think what we had understood for some time, which was this overlay of looking at Al Qaeda working hand in hand, side by side with like CIA and other factions that we were trying to destabilize in countries like Iraq or Libya or even Macedonia and Bosnia and other countries, right, where
Hmm.
we had vested interests with Al Qaeda. So you start to understand, okay, they're not trying to fight terrorism. We're working with terrorism to overthrow and destabilize governments that are at odds with our foreign policy or economic policy, or whatever it may be.
And I think people are kind of realizing that more all the time. And I want to kind of come in on a big landing here when we're done about like the polarization, because you look at some of the things like the Iran Contra stuff, where or even say 9/11, like the whole country agreed, like we don't want that, but it wasn't as political left and right on how we were going to address it. But the idea of using though the media levers to influence the population. Let's go back to another quote. We screen captured this from your documentary from Joseph Goebbels. Propaganda works best when those who are being manipulated are confident that they are acting on their own free will. Like they made an art. That's kind of, and maybe it began long before them. But his title was Third Reich Minister of Public Enlightenment. That kind of shocked me as much as the quote. I mean, Minister of Public Enlightenment. That's pretty interesting for an organ. We just got back from Israel. We were in Jerusalem and visited the Holocaust Museum there, and we've been to the one in D.C. here, and it was different though. Being in Jerusalem. One thing that shocked me is they had this section that had a radio that was from Nazi era Germany that was pre-calibrated. They gave them to the citizens, and when you bought them in a retail store, they were pre-calibrated to only pick up the state-approved channels.
Yeah.
Like you couldn't hear a dissenting idea. There was just like the state approved idea. And I'm watching that through the lens of the fact of we're not very bombastic. Like even on the spectrum, you got Alex Jones or somebody, over here. I'm kind of pretty much like just talking to doctors like Peter McCullough about the vaccine. It's like very middle of the road, what I would consider middle of the road. And I'm on my 6th YouTube channel.
That's right.
So I'm watching that. I'm thinking that's not too far fetched from where we are now. And I just want to read that quote again. And this is from your documentary. Propaganda works best when those who are being manipulated are confident that they're acting on their own free will. It means they gotta do a good job too of creating the propaganda, and that the propaganda, most of the things you're seeing on a screen, didn't get there organically or by accident.
Right. That's absolutely right. Yeah. Again, that's the intentionality of media, and I mean, it's just something that I've grown up seeing my whole life because I got a chance to obviously watch films get made, right? And I also got a chance to see the media attack people like my father, right? For trying to tell his perspective of what happened with Kennedy assassination, right? And and he was called a conspiracy theorist and ridiculed and all that kind of stuff. So um, I've seen it from many ways, and I think I've talked about this before, but like a big experience for my awakening was just traveling the world, because when you travel, you realize things are not the way they appear on the box, right? Going back to that quote, it's like, okay, the television set tells me what's going on in the Ukraine or going on in, you name it, whatever country, some African countries, some, Asian country, European country. It's like, oh, that's what's going on. It's based in the box. And then you travel the world and you go to like places that are war zones or have been war zones, and you see people, you talk to people, you understand much more about the conflict and how these things are manipulated. And yeah, I mean, it's so curious that I think for a long time that was always the accusation leveled against America, was just a lack of traveling and connection to other countries and cultures, to really get the different perspectives on things. And so I think there has been a tonal shift in America in our lifetimes, from the jingoistic warmongering from the Vietnam era, basically the post World War II era, right, where we were riding high on the victory of World War II, through the embarrassment of Vietnam, and then trying to basically revitalize this idea of American glory through war with Iraq 1 and 2, and bombing Serbia, and then it's like after, I think Iraq was really the point where American people just got tired of it, and they were just like, what is the point of all this?
Yeah.
These wars, they're not really serving us. They're not really defensive wars. It's not like we're being invaded and we're protecting our homes. These are aggressive, senseless wars that are really not helping us, benefiting us as Americans. And so I think there was a real shift by the time Trump came into office. So the change then became, okay, well, we can't push, Trump didn't push any new wars. So it was like, okay, we can't push for any new wars. So the new war has been, the last few years, was been COVID, right? Let's declare a war on COVID, because that's what the government has to declare wars, because otherwise it can't perpetuate this fraud that, like, oh yeah, we have a purpose. The government's, the federal government's purpose basically is declaring endless wars that you have to pay for.
Right. Well, and they even say often it's hard to create change. It's hard to get something to happen in a peacetime era. A little bit like it's kind of hard for my wife. It's hard for her to get me to get something done around the house if we don't have company coming to visit. It's kind of like, oh, hey, we got some urgency. Oh, your folks are coming to stay. We better hang those curtains. It's kind of, you need an event to sort of kind of create movement sometimes. And that's kind of how they use war. It's like, hey, we got this big problem, so here's what we need. We got to fund the industrial complex. We got to make some bombs. We got to do whatever. And the thing with Americans is we love freedom so much that we're willing to die for it. And then people are looking back now thinking, like even what you said there a moment ago would have been considered kind of anti-American, anti-patriotic in previous eras of hey, that was a meaningless, war. Now we're kind of looking like, hey, people are thinking about this Ukraine thing. Now we're finding out we have troops on the ground. They're fighting. Nobody agreed to that. They're telling us that we have our sons and daughters on the ground there. And they're like, what's this for? Exactly. Is this for Hunter Biden's like retirement fund? Or like, you better give me some clarity of what's going on before we start waving flags over this thing. It doesn't make me not love America. It just means like, I want to know, what are we dying for? Is this, I think people are really wanting a little more now than they ever have before. Let's dig into this thing here. See if you can walk me through so I understand this deal a little bit about Barry Seal. Barry Seal in this I say documentary / really great movie with Tom Cruise called American Made. And I want to kind of walk through, I kind of got the pictures of these characters here a little bit, but walk through the idea of going back to the I guess he was working with the CIA going back to the Bay of Pigs. But in the movie, again, I just want to make sure people know we kind of breezed over it with Argo a little bit ago. But there's CIA government money and approval that goes through the making of Argo. We want this told a certain way. And we're going to cover a bunch of other movies you referenced to, American Sniper and a whole bunch of other things. But let's talk about this one because this seems a little more complex than most. So I went to this movie and loved it because Tom Cruise was going to be in it. This is probably going to be a good movie, blah, blah, blah. And it was super entertaining about, the guy, but they made it seem like the guy on the right, Barry Seal, like he was like smuggling cigars or something. It's kind of like just a nobody. He was just a bumpkin. He's from Arkansas. He's just, just normal dude. And he's kind of just coming back and forth. And then just he's stumbled into the ability to be able to do something that's worth more than cigars. And he's bringing some cocaine back and forth. And here's the deal. The movie's done so well. I'm at the theater cheering for him to not get caught, because movies are that good. He's clearly a bad guy. He's bringing cocaine into America and like kids are getting hooked on cocaine. But the movies are so good. I leaned to my wife. I go, are you kind of hoping he doesn't get caught? She's like, absolutely. We're pulling for him to make it. That's how powerful film is. So, so let's break this down though a smidge. I got some notes here, but okay. Barry Seal was connected. I think we even got a shot here of a table of characters that he was working with the CIA going back to Bay of Pigs. We may have that. But Doug Liman was the director of this movie. There we go. I think Barry Seal's in this shot maybe somewhere. Somebody's even got their face covered. So it's like, I don't know when this was taken or for what. But so he had a background going back to before the Tom Cruise movie, American Made. But the American Made movie was directed by Doug Liman, who's done a lot of famous movies. I think he did the one with Tom Cruise also, where they die a million times and keep doing it over and over again. I forget the name of it. But his dad, make sure you get this right, was Arthur Liman, who was an attorney for Henry Kissinger and a whole bunch of other characters. But he was also the one that ran the Iran-Contra hearings that kind of made Oliver North into a hero. Back when I was in high school, I remember we took time out of my class in government class to watch these hearings with Oliver North. Kind of dates myself a little bit. So it's like none of this was like organic, and they made this film that kind of portrayed the whole thing a little bit different reality. But then when you poke behind it, it's like, okay, the director of the film, everybody was kind of involved in the real life case, and it kind of helped me make sense of all this.
Yeah, I mean, Barry Seal, people want to know more about Barry Seal. Danny Hopsicker did a great book on him, Barry and the Boys. And that picture is in Barry and the Boys. And what you'll see in that photo there, you're looking at, are a bunch of the Cubans that were involved in not just the Bay of Pigs, but also became like part of the, I think some of them became White House plumbers. I think there's, what was his name? Felix Rodriguez, who was like a major CIA asset, even an agent. He was the guy that helped to get Che Guevara in Bolivia. And there's Frank Sturgis. Yeah,
good job, Producer Colton. He did that on the fly. Good job.
Was that?
I said, good job, Producer Colton. Came up with this on the fly as we talk with highlighted figures. Fantastic.
There you go. Yeah, there's three of them, and I think there's more guys. I think there's a CIA officer in there. I think one of the white guys he became one of the heads of the CIA. So you're talking about like a table full of CIA operatives, and there's Barry Seal smack in the middle of it. And as Hopsicker pointed out, like Seal was fascinating, like his backstory going back to that time period. He's hanging out with these guys, some of whom, could have been involved with the Kennedy assassination. He definitely was part of the Civil Air Patrol that Oswald was in, along with Dave Ferry, who was also CIA. And in the film JFK, the Dave Ferry character is played by Joe Pesci. And it's like, it's pretty clear that Ferry was kind of handling Oswald, right? So Barry Seal's like part of that whole thing. And like this guy is like, he could have been part of the Kennedy assassination. He could have been a getaway pilot, one of the getaway
But
pilots.
in the movie, nothing like that at all. Yeah. He's just a bumpkin that sort of he's more like Forrest Gump than he is like a CIA operative.
Let's put it like this. He's so deeply into that world that he has one of George Bush's private lines in his black book, if I recall correctly. He definitely has George Bush Sr., who was George Bush Sr., basically of the CIA, the guy that literally when Kennedy is killed, Hoover says, Hoover has a memorandum sent to him we basically debriefed George Bush of the CIA, and literally the Bush clan and everybody said, "Oh no, that's another George Bush." The only other George Bush was like a janitor. There was no other George Bush that they were debriefing after the Kennedy assassination, right? It was
Very common
so
name.
funny, right? And so so again, like Barry Seal knew Bush. He was protected by Clinton. That's why he was operating through what was it, Mena, Arkansas, right? Was his hub. And so and it's even in the movie, I think they mentioned that the governor Clinton at the time basically helps him out, but he's also ultimately disposed of. They kill him, and again, some of those Cubans could have been involved in assassinating Seal, because again, it was like he knew too much, and he was, when the heat comes on and he started getting investigated, to become disposable, right? Like an Epstein. So so Barry Seal's a fascinating character, and it was just interesting. Lyman, his father obviously was very politically connected, right? I mean, he was what, a senator, was it?
It was a senator that ran the hearings of the Iran-Contra. So it's like kind of fascinating.
Yeah, well, that's the point. I mean, how much didn't come out? The point of the Iran-Contra hearings was, as you know, there was a cover-up when it came to the drug trafficking angle. They acknowledged some money laundering. They acknowledged, right, there was things that were done that were behind Congress's back, because Congress had basically prohibited arms and money going to the Contras. But the actual drug trafficking aspect was completely whited out of the equation of those hearings, right?
But then they can pretend like we addressed all this. Like, so if anybody brings up, and that's where kind of the conspiracy comes into things, because then you have a Thanksgiving table and somebody at Thanksgiving table brings up, like, what about the drugs these guys are moving? Oh, they've looked into all that. There's nothing. There's nobody here. It was just this guy in Arkansas that was just kind of, because they can't not address something, but you got to address it, and then you got to rebrand it and remarket it in this whole new way.
If you don't treat Barry Seal as a CIA asset, and I can't remember if the film does, right? It does treat him as a CIA asset.
It's like insinuated. There's a couple of meetings he might have had, like in an airport, like lounge, but it doesn't come out and say it.
Yeah,
I mean, it's insinuated maybe, so they can like, hey, we kind of addressed it, but it's never like painted as that's the deal.
Yeah, no, I understand. These things can be tricky, but the point is that it's not the most accurate portrayal of Barry Seal. And at the same time, as you said, it's entertaining, it's lively, it makes you root for him. He's got like a Scarface kind of quality, right?
He's amazing. And it's Tom Cruise.
And it's Tom Cruise.
You're pre-programmed to pull for Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like you like Top Gun, you like anything. So like he automatically comes in it. So whoever he's playing, you're gonna kind of like, well, this guy, you're gonna give him the benefit of a doubt.
Right.
I mean, he was a freaking samurai.
He was a samurai.
Like the samurai movie was so good. I remember watching it thinking, that'd be a pretty good life. These guys this is quiet. They have no internet. They're just working on their craft. They're all learning a martial art, and then they're working in the like. I was like, why are we not samurais? This is like in 8th grade, I wanted to be a pilot in the Navy, and I'm scared of heights and don't like going that fast. So I'm like, it's like his movies are his portrayal. I mean, are that good?
Well, it's just it's like funny, because that was one of the films that I remember I watched with my father, and it felt like it was
American made, or
I was gonna say like no, this Last Samurai.
The Samurai. Okay.
What was it modeled on? I mean, it has like a Braveheart-esque sort
very
of quality,
much so.
right? But the thing about it is like you watch it and it's just like it's not only just completely absurd, but I love how like you talk about the white savior complex, right? And it truly is like the epitome of the white savior complex. Like everyone is dead except Tom Cruise on this battle. And then, ultimately it's like, everyone's like, now like, the media and Hollywood are all about like, fighting racism. And I'm like, you guys have been the biggest propagators of racism. It's so funny to me how the people that propagate these things the most then are the ones that are quickest to like, tell you, you're a racist or that's racist. And it's like, it's always the ones that are the first to go there are the most racist.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It'd be interesting watching a movie with your dad. I have a few friends that have like made some documentaries and stuff, and I've actually watched movies with them. And I keep wanting to like stop it, and I'm like, "What do you think about that?" Because like because they're watching it, through a whole different lens, of like, hey, that was really well done. The way that the camera moved away from him when he said that, or some other like artistic, piece of it that everybody else is missing. And you and your dad are both, on that same page.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we certainly.
And you probably catch quicker too what they're selling.
It's funny. I mean, it's like when I watch stuff with my girlfriend, and now she's like, she picks it up. I'll be like, I can't believe this. You could see the light, in the reflection, right? Like you could see, you could see,
Yeah.
or you could see the camera, like the shadow here, or like you certain like little errors or like continuity mistakes, things like that. And you're like, oh, that was a really bad cut.
It's a joke with my kids and I both. We're all watching a movie. If somebody like the angle's here and he's kind of leaning in, telling them this, and then he's in the middle of the word, they change the angle and he's like this. Some little thing. We're like, cut. Whatever. Like we don't like have an eye for these things, or like I don't know, like this is here, then the next, it's just accidentally it's like that or something like that. Like it's kind of a fun game within it, kind of who can catch all those. But what you guys probably catch, and maybe even you specifically, I don't know, it is. I go into a movie and I'm just like yum 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 yum, just gobble this up, just like this is.
Oh, sure.
And you're like did you see that? Did you see what they're trying to do to us right here?
Well, it's just different. I mean, I honestly, I enjoy films. I have suspension of disbelief, but I also get rubbed the wrong way when I feel like something is being pushed very intentionally, right? And you can always, how do you say? Not always. Sometimes it's very subtle, and other times it is overt to the place of being like, really? Did they just say that? So,
Right.
It's just a question of, film. It's a different experience now. People have to think about it in context. We went from a time period when film was the overarching definition or describer of what reality should look like, right? How many people like would watch movies and say like, oh, that's the way I should live, or that's the way I want to live, right?
Sure.
But I would say that like initially film was very dreamlike, right? It was more like it was larger than life. People watching it, so they weren't really comparing their life to the life on the screen. It was like there was a certain distinction. I think with television, there was a transposition of like, this is how you're supposed to live. This is what life is supposed to look like. And with like the various TV shows, starting from the 50s and the 60s and the 70s to the 80s, it's like all these different TV shows kind of showing you like, this is what a normal middle class family should look like, right? This is how a father should behave, right? This is how
Right.
kids should behave, and certain expectations are created.
Like
And
dad come home, read the paper, and there'd be like the little drink cart, with all the glass bottles with a little bit of whatever in it, and it's like, you
Sure.
kind of grow, or a giant globe, you open it up and it's got a little bar in it, all the
Yeah.
sitcoms all had that den,
Yeah,
and nobody in real life for the most part had that den,
yeah, and so
or
exactly,
had
so it's
a
like
den.
eventually it was like, okay, so they're selling lifestyles, and it became more and more obvious that it was like it was like almost peeling out of the screen, almost like Last Action Hero, in reverse, right? In Last Action Hero, like the kid goes into the movie, it's like the screen was peeling out into our society, into our morals, our values, our way of seeing things, and to the place of, it used to be like stars, and oh, this is the way stars live, to then the 2000s, where it was like reality television, the 90s and the 2000s. All of a sudden it was like, this is the way people are behaving and acting, and guess what, you can be a star too, and you're a celebrity too. And then that prepared us for the application generation of like Instagram and Twitter and all these different,
YouTube even,
TikTok and YouTube, right? All that was essentially, you could say, pre-programmed based on the reality TV culture, where it's like, you see, you don't have to look to the stars out there on the screen or on the TV set. You are now the star. And
Right.
there's both a positive and negative, right? I think that there's, it's great because it empowers people to then do platforms like yours and to do things that are positive, but it also brings out the worst. And that's why, to me, like the 2000s were just like a lost decade. Where literally it was like films were like to be honest, they were getting worse and worse because it was a fixation on CGI, and what you could do in the computer generation was nowhere near. I mean, now it's an amazing what they can do, right? But in that time period, it was kind of lame. So it was like, okay, let's do more like reality TV kind of stuff. And then when you have the Kardashians are like, the major stars of reality television, like the worst aspects of human behavior, basically. It's like everything gone wrong, like the precursor to what we see now, the total, not just like the castration of men, and the ego driven brattiness, all these things.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, not to say everyone is that way, but just like very much the worst
it glorify those behaviors, though, for sure. The thing I can't, it bothers me in a movie, and I can't help but point out, I'm almost irritating to be around with it in a movie. Like, it's like Friends or some show like that. Like, you live in New York as a waiter and have like a 3,000 square foot apartment, just like the lifestyle they have, and they're just sitting around drinking coffee all the time. Like, it's so like from I always watch things from the economic standpoint. When we saw the new Top Gun movie with Tom Cruise, I walked out of it. People were like, "Hey, what'd you think of it?" and stuff. And I'm like, okay. Like, okay, let's just say this. He's dating this younger woman who is really attractive and owns a bar, a small business, and she drives a Porsche and has like a 4-bedroom house right on the ocean in Southern California. I don't get it. Like, just tell me that her parents were super loaded and died and left her a few million, and then we can just go on. But other than that, I'm watching it like, this is not real. It's not real like that. That Tom Cruise looks that good at his age. It's not real that he's with her. It's not real that she's driving a Porsche. It's not real that she's a small business owner that has a 4-bedroom house, right? Right on the beach. The whole bit. But they take a lot of liberties with the finances in movies. Most of these shows, I don't care if you watch like Reba, or some sitcom like that. Like, you got a single mom with like 5-bedroom house in Houston, and she like, you could be like a waitress and have like, a $700,000 home, and it's like makes perfect sense. In a movie.
Right. Well, I think, again, I think it just depends on the flavor. I think we are at an interesting place where it's like the idea of a centralization and concentration of energy and attention that was most pronounced in the 20th century between television shows and film has now broken down to the place where the attention is scattered. And so it's very difficult. Like, I think that now it's really more about, how do you say, like their perspective of like monitoring the surveillance state, right? Knowing what you're streaming or what you're watching. A lot of it is really just about, I think, building out almost like their AI systems to then say, okay, how can we manipulate the consciousness with certain stories, given that people are into whatever it is, this political spectrum, that show, that ideology, but it's not as concentrated as it was where that you put out like a film and you're going to get 10 million to 100 million people watching it, right? Or a TV show. Right now it's like it's splintered into like, hey, look at CNN. If they get like 500,000 viewers, they're lucky, right? If they get 1 million viewers, they're lucky, right?
Yeah, well, they're doing so bad they had Trump on for a town hall. Yeah, because they like, we hate this, we hate it, we're a bunch of whores, but we need some views, and so they have Trump on for a town hall, and it's like their viewership, went through the roof. There's a lot of messaging in movies. I mentioned there a minute ago about the finances, and that makes people kind of hate their regular life, because how come I can't have a 4-bedroom house on the beach with what I make, and I own a small business. But even like my wife and I made like a game out of like when we're watching a show, when do you ever see anybody in a sexual situation, even if like you show them kissing and they move in the bedroom, and even if lights fade and they go out, that's married. Like the only time something moves into a sexual situation is outside of marriage in a movie.
Yeah.
I mean, without exception, now it's like, it's only like you cheer for it in a romantic comedy, and eventually, okay, now they slept together, so things are going to be great, because that's how it is in real life.
That's exactly so that's the kind of subtlety that you're describing that I would suggest is the nature of how the influence works. It's through these kind of subtle exchanges. It's the idea that, as you said, most narratives are around the idea of the catch of like, ooh, you have to hook the mate, but what happens next, right? What is the
Right.
relationship inside of a marriage? So there have been a few films that have been, no, there's some good films about marriage, but you're right. Most of the time it's about the breakup of marriage, the divorce, right? Or divorced couples, right? And
Hmm.
it's rare to see like a healthy married couple as the main characters in a story.
You're seeing a few. There's some actors that are. We have like rabbit trailed from my agenda here quite a bit. We'll get back to it, but there's a movie recently with Dennis Quaid where he is on a plane, like he didn't know how to fly it. It came out just a few weeks ago. We watched it on iTunes. He was like on a plane, and like the pilot died, and it's like a true story. And he had to take over. I don't know
Yeah.
if you saw that or not. It's like, well, that's a positive couple and a positive marriage, but there's nothing sexual in it.
Right.
Well, they'll
That's
they'll
right.
have it, but the idea that's kind of pushed is if you're married,
You
you're
don't.
probably
You don't
not
have.
going to have sex, and it's
You're virgin. You're
yeah.
virginal.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. It's like
Yeah.
reverse virginity,
Very
revinity, or
Yeah.
something. And then,
It's
but
very
like,
wholesome.
yes, but the hookup culture and this kind of stuff works out well. And in a movie, like, oh man, they just spent the night together. It's going to end up bad because she doesn't even know. She doesn't even know that he used to date her sister or whatever the plot is. It's like
Right.
it was out of sequence, and you can tell it's going to crash. But that's the only place that it is. So it's just the way that sex is placed within the context of movies definitely affects the culture. And whether it makes it repressed or negative or bad or what's good or what's not, it definitely dictates the pace of what's talked about, what's acceptable, and kind of what you would strive for. When it comes to morality or these kind of things. When I say movies, I mean television or even commercials. All have a vibe in it. Like got me to buy beer, and I don't like beer, so
Hmm.
it's highly effective. In getting people to move over a click, and now they're in this
Right.
lane.
Right.
Always
Right. That,
changing.
yeah.
All right, let's
That's
get.
yeah.
Let's,
That's what it is. I mean, you think about it. What was the whole point of television? It was advertising, right? It was selling you stuff and keeping your attention, in between the commercials, in a sense.
right. All right, let's jump to Gary Webb, killed the messenger, a journalist. The idea of journalists being an extension of CIA or the government, or being funded, or maybe living a dual life, or then even like if they want to come out and tell the truth about something, whether it's able to come to the surface. Like if I wrote an article that this is a Rubik's cube, you know, that shouldn't be determined based on what the government thinks about Rubik's cubes.
Hmm.
Like it should be based on, what, that is undeniable. The guy was holding a Rubik's cube, and he did he did one chapter on every different color and how they move, and it was like that. That is truth in and of itself if it's written. But when you look at the Gary Webb, they got this book, The Dark Alliance, the CIA, the Contras, and the crack cocaine explosion. I'm kind of tying still back into the Tom Cruise American Made, but this guy, it did not work out well.
Um, well, go ahead, finish
No,
your.
well, really, just that. Like, how much of that? There's a picture of him, and he kind of began bringing some of these things forward. But what is the connection between journalists being able to have things squashed, being elevated, having dual lives? Working maybe as an informant in the CIA. At one point in the documentary, you quote that there are. I mean, Carl Bernstein says maybe 400 members of the media are living dual lives to one extent or another, in that era.
That was in the 70s. Yeah, the
Yeah.
Mockingbird. Hmm.
How much of that do you think takes place now? And how much of it that maybe doesn't even have to?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question because you know you I look at conspiracies very much as ideology, right? Trajectory. So it's like you basically bring people into a certain worldview through their education process and training. And so, you know, I mean, Tucker's kind of talked about it a little bit and hinted at this stuff, right? That there's there are things you can't talk about on the network news, and
Hmm.
you can't discuss, and it's like you just don't go there. And even if you want to, as a journalist, we know there have been dozens, and if not hundreds or thousands, who have they had their work thrown into the buzzsaw. There was a book called Into the Buzzsaw that was documenting different journalists' experiences of having stories squashed by their editors, and Gary Webb was one of them. And so, yeah, I mean, the point is that there is like, you know, there's a certain ideology or worldview that you can't cross, you can't talk about, right? You go on a news station, and that it's like, remember that time when was it Giuliani or somebody mentioned George Soros, and they were like, "Oh, you can't say that," and like they kind of cut him off during the
Yeah,
interview.
Newt Gingrich. They cut his mic.
Gingrich, that's who it was. It was Gingrich.
I mean,
Yeah, he
and
mentioned
that's
George
not
Soros.
some schmuck running for dog catcher. I mean, he was Speaker of the House. He's one of the most respected politicians, accomplished or whatever you want to say, best resume. He has the
Yeah,
right to be able to speak and say his 2 cents, and
exactly.
and to have like Harris Faulkner and those guys ask him to stop on
Yeah,
Fox.
yeah,
It's like, whew,
exactly. They're like, no, no, you can't say that. You can't go there.
like
Okay,
that's
well
powerful.
that tells you. So like you don't need like to say like, well, the CIA is running it, or it's like, Anderson Cooper, trained with the CIA. He's a Vanderbilt, right? He's like
Hmm.
from one of these elite families. He's got all the markings of someone who's been created, right? But ultimately, like if he, let's say, went against the grain on something, right? He could end up like a Tucker Carlson very easily. Okay, we no longer want to contract with you because you're you know
Yeah.
you're doing something that's dangerous, right? And so, yeah, I look at it more as the ideologies of this elite class, who basically owns, they own things, right? I mean, if you're that level of wealth, and you're basically basically having controlling stakes in the corporate sector, for example, which is providing the advertisements, or directly owns the media, right? You have say, you have a voice, and that's why it's so important that we're bringing the media to the level of this, to the level of conversations like this, where each of us has a voice now. We Each of us become a host or a commentator, and each of us basically expresses and asserts our freedom of speech. And so it's really important to expand and broaden our consciousness as we go through this time period, to like
Mm.
not be afraid to have difficult conversations or things that are sensitive or whatever it is. It's like, just put it out there, see what happens. People are waking up, and that's a beautiful thing. Where we are now in terms of dialogue is far beyond anything that I saw in my lifetime. And I can imagine
Wow.
if you go back, 100 years, even though people may have in private known certain things or talked quietly, but like as far as public discourse is concerned, think about it. We are in the Great Awakening.
Man, which is really encouraging. There's a screenshot we took from your documentary. This kind of shows the idea of how few media companies there are. It's kind of got the little bubbles on it of like there's only a few companies, and they kind of other ones sort of branch off from there. You got Disney and NBC, Viacom, CBS, and it's like
That's before Disney bought Fox
yeah,
and
and
Star
it's getting even less. So you don't have to control very many outlets to control a lot of the conversation when it
That's
comes
right.
to mainstream media. Because it's like, well, we all seen the Project Mockingbird thing where one person's talking, and that clip that's kind of gone viral, and I think you referenced it even in your documentary. And eventually, there's all of these stations, people reading the exact same script, and while that may or may not have been exactly in context because they were just it was something they were unrolling that day, but either way, the the fact of if you can get a hold of just a couple of levers, it's like you can control a lot of people that are a long ways away. A lot of those places sort of get the trickle down of what they're going to be saying at their local affiliate.
And that's the point. I hate to cut you off short. I do have to get going in a minute. So if you wanted to maybe like throw like a last question, or
Yeah,
uh,
we'll kind of wrap it up with this because we could all kind of direct people towards your DC, your Hollywood DC documentary, but kind of in closing, we see the divisions, and I I don't know when I walk out of my house and I talk to my neighbor that we're going to describe the same instance the same way, because they might have heard a totally different version of the exact same thing. You know, a Kyle Rittenhouse kind of a story, or any number of things. What do you see as the future of this moving forward? And then what can individuals do to begin taking back their own liberties of their own mind? So like they know for sure, I think this cup has coffee in it, or I think this cup has Coca-Cola in it, or maybe it's full of vodka. I don't know. But like to where I'm going to do my research and come up with my own conclusion. And part of it is, you know, how do people even know that what they think is in there is from their own thinking anyway? What do you see as the future of this as we move forward and media's influence on us and how we behave?
I mean, media is going to continue to influence us, but the beautiful thing is the consolidation is breaking down, as we're talking about, because you have so many different platforms and so many different personalities that are now having influence and creating influence, and that will only continue. It's like, you know, it's like chopping down the tree and basically allowing its seeds to go back into the earth, and next thing you know, you end up with 1,000 smaller trees, or 1,000 different size trees, maybe some bigger, some smaller. So the point is that we have to, as you mentioned, get control of our own minds. Only you can do that. No one can tell you how to do it. If you're out there repeating and parroting what someone else tells you, you're not thinking for yourself. You're not connecting to your own connection to God, your own intuition, your own spirit. So that's basically your own lack of your missed opportunity. It's your own, you could say it's your sin. It's your miss in this lifetime, is to not connect to yourself, to recognize, wait, I am made by my creator. I can connect to that. I have my own intuition and my own mind, and I can hear you and think, okay, there are things you're saying that resonate, and there are other things that maybe don't resonate as much. That's the power that each of us has to claim for ourselves in this time. This is a time of sovereignty. So those that can't claim sovereignty, I look at them like the Walking Dead.
Because even like in the documentary, because you kind of bring Reagan into some question there, and I'm like, you know, because man, I sort of like remove anything that's bad, that's all good, like you do your grandkids maybe, or something like that. I got 2 grandkids, and they can't do wrong, and we kind of have that with our own categories in life. We've got to be willing to, like, you know what, was he great or not? I think he did a lot of great things. Maybe it was Bush, bad guy in his ear, and I'll dump it all on you know, like we have to have some way to sort of justify that. But I think the real move forward is, like you said, we got to be able to take honest looks at what we're looking at, and be willing to say, you know what, maybe he could be a flawed character, but that doesn't make him too much one way or the other. But I got to be able to look at things honestly.
That's right. That's exactly the point.
And work like yours is what helps do it. So we're going to put a link down below so people can be able to watch the Hollywood DC documentary. I think the more people that can do that, the better. If every American could watch that, I guarantee the world would be different tomorrow. It would change things, because it would wake people up.
You guys can put it out on Flyover Conservatives, put it on your platforms, share it. Let's just share it. You know, let's spread it.
We're going to start pushing it hard. Sean, thanks for the work that you do in private to be able to put such great things out in public. And thanks for being a friend of the show and a friend of ours. We think the world of you, and thanks for taking your time to be with us today.
Are you having a hard time sleeping at night, thinking, what am I going to do about my finances?
You know, times are really changing. They're changing fast. Let me give you a quick example of how. In 1920, if you had a $20 bill and 1 ounce of gold, you could go into any men's clothing store and buy an entire suit. You could buy the jacket, the shirt, the belt, shoes, the whole bit. Today, that $20 bill, what's it going to get you?
Not much.
Maybe the socks, maybe a handkerchief, but the 1 ounce of gold could still buy you the entire suit at any men's store in America. That's the difference. That's what inflation does to your dollar. It's a deflating dollar caused by inflation. Now today, that's happening faster than ever. You need somebody that you trust that can help get you out of a fake currency and into something that's going to keep you safe.
And we know a guy that has 2 PhDs by the name of Dr. Kirk Elliott. We have known him for over 25 years, and he's someone we completely trust.
You need somebody that you can get a hold of, somebody that's going to be there for you to get back out of it, and then maybe back into the stock market, maybe back into something else when things settle down. But right now is not that time. You need somebody that you trust and somebody you can call and make those worries go away.
That's exactly right. So you can go to flyovergold.com, fill out your information for a free consultation, or you can call 720-605-3900. Do it today.
You'll be glad you did. All right, Flyover family, I enjoyed that conversation so much. I hope that you did as well. Talked with Sean, and he said, hey, full board, let's go ahead and just run with the Hollywood DC documentary. So we're going to go ahead and play that in its entirety right now. Give us some comments down below, kind of what windows it opens up in your mind, which ones it closes, and kind of what your reaction is. And please share this with people that you know, love, and care about, because we all need to wake up and take more ownership for what we know, what we think, and what we think about what we know. And this will help you do it. Hope you enjoy.
Separated by 3,000 miles. When we think of Hollywood, we don't necessarily associate it with Washington politics. But art, by its very nature, imitates and reflects life. Whether promoting lifestyles, ideology, or war, the media has a powerful hold over public opinion.
Hollywood creates the grand perception of the world. It is the wizard behind the veil.
We know politicians court Hollywood stars for support. Katy Perry was paid over $70,000 to perform for the Hillary Clinton campaign, while it seems no money was needed for Clint Eastwood to stump at the Republican National Convention in 2012. Harvey Weinstein's ties to the Clintons and Barack Obama run deeper than the millions of dollars of campaign contributions he's raised. Obama's daughter Malia went to intern for the Weinstein Company after his presidency. But political campaign support should be expected from citizens, celebrity or not. The deeper threat arises when film and media are influenced to tell stories on behalf of the political establishment. Such products could be construed as propaganda.
There are an awful lot of people in Hollywood who have some kind of relationship with the CIA and Department of Defense. An awful long list of individuals that we put in the book. I mean, loads of these people have visited Langley, and some of them have closer connections than that. So Ben Affleck, for instance, Ben Affleck's former wife, Jennifer Garner, did unpaid recruitment ads for the CIA.
In early 2013, Americans might have found it curious to see the First Lady appear via satellite at the Academy Awards ceremony to announce the Best Picture Oscar for a film about the rescue of American hostages from Iran in 1980 by the CIA.
Well, when I think of other films, big films, that have conveyed the CIA's message, I think of Argo. Argo is a film that talks about the daring do of a couple of CIA agents who go to Iran and rescue 6 American diplomats. The Iranians wanted to let go of those hostages pretty quickly. They didn't really want to cause a problem with the United States of America. But Ayatollah Khomeini, who has been personified as evil in the US press, had made a deal with the Reagan administration, or the Reagan campaign at that point, not to release the hostages. And only after Reagan had been elected, strangely enough, that day the hostages were released. So that film neglects to mention how pivotal the Reagan administration was, or the Reagan campaign was, in making sure that those hostages weren't released. It was called the October Surprise.
The October Surprise may have set the stage for the Iran-Contra scandal of the 1980s, as Reagan's White House cut deals with the Iranian government to sell them arms in exchange for assistance in releasing American hostages, including CIA agents, in Lebanon. The proceeds from those arms sales were illegally diverted to the Contra armies fighting to overthrow the socialist government in Nicaragua.
He'd betrayed America. What he had done was far worse than Nixon and Watergate. And here was Reagan getting away with it. And Katharine Graham, she was one of the leaders of the conservative movement there to kill off. She said no more Watergates, because she said the country can't survive it. So when the Iran-Contra broke, there was no cooperation from the media to go after Reagan on that.
So, for example, in 1994, there was a film called Countermeasures, which had been scripted and greenlit. It was going to star Sigourney Weaver, Gina Davis. It was, a big production. But it was set on an aircraft carrier, and it referred to Iran-Contra, the CIA gun-running scandal involving Iran and Nicaragua and El Salvador and so on. And the military literally said in a memo, We have no reason to remind the American public of the Iran-Contra scandal or to denigrate the White House. And that is the mentality there. So they said, no, we won't provide an aircraft carrier for your filming, and the film was therefore never made, even though it was a long way down the track. Now that happens time and time and time and time again, which ultimately changes the culture, the popular culture in the United States and across the West. And by changing the popular culture, you're also playing havoc with the political culture as well.
In 2017, Tom Cruise starred in American Made, a film exposing the dark side of Iran-Contra, that the CIA knew drugs were being smuggled into America to facilitate financing their Contra armies. But the film did its best to portray one of the smugglers, Barry Seal, as an independent wild card, rather than a lifelong CIA asset.
Barry Seal was one of the most important covert operatives of the U.S. from the time of the Bay of Pigs. And yet this movie has the CIA first learning about him when they see that he's successfully smuggling cigars from Cuba. The director, Doug Liman, is the son of the House Majority Counsel to the Kerry Commission that looked into Iran-Contra. They never got to the bottom of the Contra cocaine thing, but his dad was generally looked upon as a good guy. But I do research into him. First of all, he's the guy that made Oliver North famous. It was as a result of his inept questioning that Oliver North became America's hero. And then I find out that this guy, his father, also was a personal attorney for Henry Kissinger, personal attorney for Robert Vesco, personal attorney for Michael Milken, and the list goes on.
Doug Liman's father, Arthur, was not part of the subsequent Kerry subcommittees that ultimately revealed cocaine smuggling in the Contra supply network. When journalist Gary Webb published articles in the San Jose Mercury to better elucidate the relationship between CIA and other agencies that protected Contra drug trafficking, he was run out of mainstream journalism. His story was finally told in 2014's Kill the Messenger.
Gary Webb, was a really great investigative reporter who broke a story right at the beginning of the internet era. It was actually the first big internet news expose. And it involved some allegations of CIA-connected drug sales in the 1980s and LA's biggest crack kingpin, Freeway Ricky Ross, who was well known to the public because the LA Times had already called him the kingpin of crack cocaine, the person most responsible for the rise of the drug epidemic. Gary Webb came along and revealed that Nicaraguans working with the CIA had actually provided him with cheap cocaine for all these years. The three major newspapers all stepped in with the Washington Post, which has traditionally been like the attack dog of the CIA over the decades and to a certain extent still is. They just attacked Gary's story and then attacked Gary's entire career and tried to discredit him and drove him out of journalism. Nothing like that has ever happened before or since, to my knowledge. And again, as you mentioned, it drove him out of journalism and ultimately destroyed his life.
The relationship between the ruling elite and media has existed since the origin of newspapers. But in 1917, Congressman Calloway and Moore sounded the alarm that the J.P. Morgan Bank, working with big steel, shipping, and weapons manufacturers, had purchased controlling interests in 25 of the largest newspapers across the country to promote American entry into the First World War on the side of the British and French, who owed the Morgan banks hundreds of millions of dollars in wartime debts. Hollywood was quickly recruited to the war cause.
In 1917, the government started to issue what they called at the time Liberty Bonds, and Hollywood rallied to the cause and helped sell these Liberty Bonds. You had people like Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, Charlie Chaplin, and other Hollywood stars out there promoting these war bonds.
The whole field of public relations, in fact, the name public relations was created by a guy named Bernays. He created the field, he was a young man, specifically to sell war bonds for the First World War. That was the origin of what we now know as public relations. And he realized instead of telling people buy bonds because you'll make some money off your bonds, save it will help America. Instead, it was like, you're buying bonds to defeat the Hun, that killing babies in Belgium. This was his propaganda, So if you're against killing babies in Belgium, buy U.S. war bonds. And so the whole war bond propaganda, that was the very first use of what we today call public relations.
But you also had during World War I the beginnings of government propaganda on a much larger scale. Much of this was run through the Committee on Public Information that was headed by George Creel. And they were deliberately trying to manipulate the public to support the war. And they did that on a lot of different fronts. Again, during World War I, this was a time when you had vast censorship, where it was against the law to oppose the draft. It was against the law to publicly speak against the war, really. And many very patriotic Americans were thrown into prison during World War I because they were opposing the war, including Eugene Debs, including Big Bill Haywood, people who spoke out against World War I as being a war in which working class kids were being sacrificed in the name of profits for the big banks.
In the 1930s, radio was the internet of its day, and programs like the Radio Research Project at Princeton University, with Rockefeller Foundation financing, had already begun to discern that, in the words of Theodore Adorno, radio music listeners are not childlike, but they are childish. Their primitivism is not that of the undeveloped, but that of the forcibly retarded. Frank Stanton was one of the project's directors before becoming president of CBS News.
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program of dance music to bring you a special bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News. At 20 minutes before 8 Central Time, Professor Farrell of the Mount Jennings Observatory, Chicago, Illinois, reports observing several explosions of incandescent gas occurring at regular intervals on the planet Mars. The spectroscope indicates the gas to be hydrogen and moving toward the Earth with enormous velocity.
In 1938, Orson Welles created a national panic with his radio broadcast of H.G. Wells's War of the Worlds. About a quarter of the listeners on Halloween morning actually believed they were being invaded by the dread Germans. And 3 years later, that attack did come, not by Germans or Martian invaders, but by the Japanese.
One of the ironies is that many of the people who were going to be blacklisted and graylisted during the McCarthy period were the ones who were out there promoting the war and promoting war bonds during the war.
In the hysteria of the early Cold War, anyone seen as pro-communist, despite the Soviets being America's strongest ally during the war, were now subject to loyalty oaths, background checks, and even unemployment. While some Hollywood actors like Ronald Reagan actually became FBI informants, others refused to disavow their First Amendment freedom of political association during the witch hunt.
In September of 1947, we've got the first hearings about the Hollywood 10, as we've come to know them. They actually called for 41 witnesses, 19 of whom they expected to be hostile. Of those 19, 10 testified. 10 leading Hollywood people, 7 of whom were writers. Only 1 was an actor, but they claimed the First Amendment and refused to answer questions about their political affiliations based upon the First Amendment. They were later found to be in contempt. They were sent to prison in 1950. These are people like Dalton Trumbo, Ring Lardner. Lardner was the most highly paid and successful screenwriter in Hollywood at the time. I mean, these are the top names. These were Academy Award winners, and they were clearly very, very patriotic, and they refused to talk about whether they had been members of the Communist Party. There was nothing illegal about being a member of the Communist Party, and given America's commitment to First Amendment rights, there was no reason why they should be called to testify about that. But careers were ruined.
And my uncle was blacklisted, Oliver Crawford, who later became head of the Screenwriters Guild. And, we do forget that Hollywood was very complicit. And while we talk about there's the story, the Unfriendly 10, writers like Dalton Trumbo, who had written anti-war scripts, and now they are being labeled as communists because they weren't going along with the new militarism. But remember, Hollywood did turn in these people. My uncle could not get work. It was very, very difficult to break through. It took him 10 years of being terrorized and being knocked out to be able to get back to Hollywood. And even then, things had to be sanitized. There's a myth that Hollywood was this great liberal outlet. Because when the liberals had it, there was not really any discussion of class war in America, of who's controlling America. In other words, it was soft liberal social issues like gay rights, civil rights, but remember, not too early, only kind of after Martin Luther King smashed them in the face and they couldn't ignore him at the Selma March and Bloody Sunday. But so you have basically social liberalism, women's rights. But again, it's soft stuff, soft liberalism.
While Hollywood tends toward liberality on social issues, its war films rarely question the heroism or benevolent intentions of American troop deployments since World War II.
My father was in that war, and he hated these war movies because of the glorification. He said they're leaving out the real horror show. And because of that, he couldn't stand watching these glorifications of the Second World War.
I really hope you understand how impossible it was to make Platoon. I mean, it was written in 1976. It was not made till 86. I was turned down dozens of times. It was very hurtful. And to be rejected, people would say, it's a great script. It did help my reputation as a writer, but no one would make it because it was too depressing, they said. But I said, what's depressing about the truth? Truth should be in the movies, but that's a conflict that goes to the heart of Hollywood. I mean, Hollywood was never based on telling the truth. You can't lose money being American. Lone Survivor, he carried Chuck Norris metamorphed into Mark Wahlberg in Lone Survivor, and he kills, how many? I mean, I forgot, 7 Americans get killed. For every American, they take down 20 or 30 Taliban, of course. It's the same thing in Black Hawk Down. Every American who gets killed in that battle, check it out, has to kill I think 30 or 40 dark-skinned people. It's just amazingly, that's the way it has to be. There's kind of a biblical commandment that says 1 dead American equals 30, 40 foreign.
Marcus Luttrell's Lone Survivor certainly glorified the American war machine's ability to fight off overwhelming enemy odds, drawing more upon the mythology of John Wayne's Green Berets than reality. The Green Berets was made during the Vietnam War with the full cooperation of the Pentagon and President Lyndon Johnson. Likewise, Lone Survivor was made during the Afghan War with Pentagon support. It depicted Navy SEALs fending off hundreds of Taliban and killing dozens in a valiant Alamo-like last stand. But the after-action report that day only acknowledged up to 30 Taliban being present and no reports of enemy casualties. Even the Afghani man who saved Luttrell's life denounced the book.
But really what we're talking about is the military having a massive role within Hollywood in terms of manipulating script content. We've found that what was particularly interesting to us was not that there was a large number of these products that were affected, but that previous scholarship, that everyone, all journalists, everybody assumed that there were just a few hundred of these things affected. But we found, using Freedom of Information Act requests, that there are actually a few thousand. And that's obviously been what you might call a cover-up, or at least some kind of sort of soft cover-up, you may put it, to make it look like this isn't such a great issue of censorship, but it is.
Early on in my career, when I sent the Platoon script to get some Pentagon help in the Philippines, they wrote back that we had to really rethink Vietnam. Having been there as a frontline soldier, of course, I objected to all their objections. And not only that, they put out an order, not an order as much as a desist kind of memorandum to their commanders saying that the troops should not cooperate with this movie. Same thing happened to us on Born on the 4th of July.
So I was doing a TV pilot, and we were filming in Northern California, and it was written by Gary DeVore. We played these FBI agents kind of thing. And I get a knock on the door. I've gone through hair and makeup. I've memorized my lines for that day. And I get a knock on the door, and it's the second or third AD. And the guy says, well, Stephen, we've got these rewrites for you. You know, I was like, well, wait a second. I've already memorized my lines. Like, why the rewrites, you know? And he said, well, we talked to the FBI, and they want to make these adjustments. And that was my first kind of, I don't know, introduction to the fact that if you're playing, if the alphabet agencies or any agencies are used, like FBI, certainly CIA, anytime you're doing a film and those letters are involved, and maybe even in cases where they don't use those letters, but they use something similar, they have final approval on what's being said and what's, you know, what you're saying.
Steve Shellen is a Canadian-born actor who found success in Hollywood films like A River Runs Through It and The Bodyguard. But he alleges that when he tried to launch his own production company in Canada called Lionsgate, his endeavor was sabotaged. To this day, he does not profess to know the who or why behind it.
I had my own bad experience where I was starting a production company and it was stolen from me. My children were threatened and kidnapped. I ended up basically losing everything, including a nice house under the Hollywood sign, a farm up here in Canada. And I was on the run, being tracked and followed, and I was pretty undone by the whole experience. Well, I went in a bar in Beverly Hills one night, and I ran into Gary DeVore, and Gary was friendly as usual. Hey, Steve, how you doing? You know, and I was like, oh, Gary, you wouldn't believe this. And I gave him like the mini version of what I'd gone through. And what was kind of great is that Gary didn't look at me like I was nuts. He didn't discount what I was saying. He just basically agreed with me and said, yeah, well, they can do that if they want. He also told me about a project he was working on that had to do with the war in Panama, and he was divulging stuff or writing about stuff, and that you know, his buddies in the CIA were not happy.
This is 20 years ago, and we know a lot of this now. We did not then, and what this was about was the Medellin cartel sending huge amounts of cocaine into the United States, and the government being aware of it and not taking the stand against it that they might have, and that there was a tremendous amount of money from the Medellin cartel transferring this cocaine into our country that went under the guise of a business deal, I guess, and was put into Panamanian banks while Noriega was in power there with us. And the money was laundered and was spent on insurgency groups, Nicaragua, Sandinistas, all of the things that we now actually know are pretty true. But then there was none of this known, and for reasons that I was unaware of at the time, Gary was aware of all of these things.
Gary DeVore was a successful screenwriter, known for his films like The Dogs of War and Raw Deal, as well as his bizarre disappearance.
It was 1997. He was on his way back to turn a script into the studio that he was going to direct, and it was actually the only time that the finished script, the computer, all of the research was in one place. It was in his car, and he disappeared on his way back. Members of the CIA and the NSA appeared in my home within the first 4 or 5 days, and many other unusual things started happening. I realized that perhaps it was not a typical crime. It only aims in one direction. It aims in the direction that this person was definitely working with the intelligence community. They said, don't you believe he's dead? It's been over a year. And I said, no. If you want me to believe he's dead, give me a body. 9 days later, I was given a body. I was awakened at 7 in the morning. It was Chase Brandon calling me from Langley saying they found the car. They found the car with the body in it. And there was a 3-hour time difference, of course, between New York and LA. And at 10 o'clock, they called me from the sheriff's department in LA to tell me they'd found the car.
Well, they found him a year later or whatever in his truck. The skeletal remains, and then his hands were supposedly thrown in the back of the truck. So I guess that was sending a message to anybody that if you go rogue, or if you go, off the ranch, as they say, or whatever, and you're hitting up against the CIA and what their plans are, then this is what we're going to do. And I guess cutting off the hands is really indicative of, that's his tool, right? His hands.
The mystery of Gary DeVore's fate may linger as long as that of JFK. But it is intriguing that DeVore's disappearance came in 1997, the year after the CIA established its first official Hollywood liaison office. It may have been merely symbolic, but it seemed to portend the coming decade of the 2000s, when the Patriot Act and a U.S.-led global war would dominate the American conscience, as though the U.S. government did not trust its citizens to think critically for themselves. And more importantly, crises would have to unfold cathartically on the big screen, where the heroes of the American intelligence services and military would inevitably fight to defend global freedom. But behind the lies, we must ask ourselves, how much have we swallowed the pill of propaganda, evolved from psychological warfare, a phrase derived from Nazi Germany's Weltanschauungskrieg, worldview warfare. In 1991, Warner Brothers released an Oliver Stone film that challenged the entire government narrative of the Kennedy assassination. JFK was not only a blockbuster success, nominated for Best Picture, it prompted congressional legislation promising to release all government files on the case by 2017. The film presented a conspiracy theory of CIA and Pentagon elements colluding to foment a coup d'etat against the presidency on behalf of the military-industrial complex.
What happened was that after JFK, they opened an office in Hollywood. The Pentagon always had this Hollywood relationship going back for years, but CIA never quite this way. So they opened an office in '96. They sent out a guy called Chase Brandon. He mentored and he got involved with Sum of All Fears, Argo, Zero Dark 30, the Alias series, MI3. Charlie Wilson's War is more of a Pentagon deal, but there it was complete distortion. Tom Hanks is a hero. Charlie Wilson was an idiot, a moron who went to Afghanistan and caused a lot of damage. Bill Casey was running his own war in Afghanistan. It's a very complicated story, but the analysis of Charlie Wilson's war is that, we have to go to war for Afghanistan because it's the Soviets are going to destroy Afghanistan and threaten our way of life.
Zero Dark 30 is also an egregious example of propaganda. One of the premises of Zero Dark 30 is that torture is not only efficacious but beneficial in the war against quote-unquote terror.
I'm not your friend. I'm not going to help you. I'm going to break you. Any questions?
Waterboarding has been a U.S. instrument of interrogation dating back to its wars in Vietnam and even the Philippines. The CIA even created its Kubark intelligence manual in 1963 to teach torture methods. Thus, it should come as little surprise to see the CIA torturing captured suspects in a film written with CIA approval about the hunt for bin Laden.
There was a book that was recently published by John Rizzo, who was a counsel for the CIA. It was called Company Man. And although he lauded the CIA and all the good works that the CIA did, he did mention, somewhat innocuously, that there were Hollywood assets sprinkled throughout Los Angeles.
Carl Bernstein had a seminal article in the Rolling Stone magazine in 1977, the Watergate muckraker, that when he covered the U.S. Senate Church Committee and their findings on U.S. intelligence and the CIA, he found that well over 400 members of the media lived dual lives in their work for the CIA. And these were not just regular journalists, but the owners of all the major media. He listed them, the owners of CBS, ABC, NBC, et cetera, Time Incorporated. Different ways they did it was basically owning, getting ownership over most of the media.
I've been a journalist for about 25 years, and I was educated to lie, to betray, and not to tell the truth to the public. Now, you ask, what have I done for intelligence agencies? So, please see, most of the journalists you see in foreign countries, they claim to be journalists, and they might be journalists, but many of them, like me in the past, are so-called non-official cover. It means you too work for an intelligence agency. You help them if they want you to help them, but when they find out that you're not only a journalist but a spy too, they will never say, oh, this was one of our guys. They will not know you. That means non-official cover. So I have helped them in several situations, and I feel ashamed for that too now. Like I feel ashamed that I have worked for a very recommended newspaper like the Frankfurter Allgemeine, because I was bribed by billionaires, I was bribed by the Americans not to report exactly the truth. I just tried to work out in my brain what would have happened if I would have written a pro-Russian article in the Frankfurter Allgemeine. Well, I don't know what would have happened, but we were all educated to write pro-European, pro-American, but please, not pro-Russian.
Frank Wisner was the head of Operation Mockingbird, and one of his famous quotes is, "You could buy a journalist cheaper than you could buy a good call girl."
While Frank Wisner ran Project Mockingbird for the CIA, he was strongly supported by Katharine Graham's husband, Philip, then the head of the Washington Post. The CIA also colluded with ABC, NBC, Reuters, the New York Times, William Paley of CBS, a former psychological warfare specialist during World War II, and Time Life, whose managing director, C.D. Jackson, had also been a psychological warfare specialist.
Buying up Hollywood is a bipartisan effort. And early on, I mean, one of the things that funded the Clinton Foundation, for example, Frank Giusti, who seized control of Lionsgate, his goal is not movies and propaganda. His goal was ownership of a president and possibly a future one, Clinton and the Mrs. Clinton. And so, for example, I was in Kazakhstan, and Clinton had shown up there with Giusti of Lionsgate, and now Clinton says there's no connection. His wife had gotten the dictator of Kazakhstan removed from a federal indictment for bribery as Secretary of State. Then Bill Clinton shows up with Giusti, says kind words about this bloodthirsty dictator, Nazarbayev, and then Giusti, who's literally Clinton's ride into Kazakhstan, has a private meeting with Nazarbayev and comes out with the exclusive contract to mine Kazakhstan's uranium. Now, maybe there's no connection, but Giusti then is in such a good mood that he gives over $30 million to the Clinton Foundation.
While the Clintons may have embedded themselves with Frank Giustra of Lionsgate, President Trump's Secretary of Treasury, Steve Mnuchin, co-founded Rat Pack in 2004, with director Brett Ratner financing dozens of blockbuster films like the X-Men series and Avatar.
For example, one of his first films that he funded when he walked in was American Sniper, which was, basically glorifying, the kind of killer SEAL Team 6 hit squads, military glorification. It's a long way from platoon to sniper. So that was the Mnuchin shift, and now he's our Secretary of Treasury.
American Sniper is really an egregious case of propaganda. It's set in the second siege of Fallujah, which was a bloodbath. I mean, the Americans, we cut off the electricity, the water to the Iraqis, and scores of innocent civilians were killed.
Increasingly so as the American media becomes a corporate mouthpiece for the government's point of view. There's a natural conflict, and that's what I'm interested in. I guess conflict. If I agreed with the government point of view, why would I make movies like that? We have directors who are quite willing to do that because they can get the cooperation, certainly big money from the Pentagon, like Ridley Scott admits to that. And Black Hawk Down's fun to watch. It's a great technically a brilliant film. He's a brilliant filmmaker, but it's a horrible film in the same sense that Lone Survivor is. It's just every American who goes down is a perfect hero. I've never seen people, I mean, I've been in combat. I've seen people get scared, you know. They know they're going down in the helicopter, and they're still talking to the commander and in official technology terms and saying, you know, mission complete or this or that or something noble or sentimental, but it doesn't work that way. People are scared. Most people before they die in some kind of way, the last thought in their head is, oh, shit.
Black Hawk Down was originally quite a kind of neutral and very successful book by Mark Bowden, and I get the impression that he very much was okay with the military heavily rewriting that and the producers heavily reworking his material. There was actually some quite critical material in that original book, Black Hawk Down, but it was all excised. And the original script, of course, had more, even the script, after it had been watered down by directors and producers, had more salacious and violent material in it, which would have called into question the Americans' role in Somalia in 1993.
Where our troops are now all over Africa. We're starting in Africa now. We have bases in how many countries in the world? 130. We have some kind of military mission. We have 900, or we don't know how many bases. We think we have 700 to 900 bases abroad, as well as 6,000 in the U.S. It's quite a military machine we have. We have two countries. We have the Pentagon and we have the U.S. Which country am I in?
I remember that one great British newsman had said when seeing film from Vietnam, which was at that time uncensored, people could go, you know, all over Vietnam, shooting film, and you could see, you know, like a child running down the street on fire from napalm. These are the images that Americans were beginning to see about Vietnam. And Alistair Cooke said, that's the end of war, because once people with television and cameras now in the field, no one's ever going to support a war when they see the horror show that it creates, the misery and the horror and the terror and the murder of civilians and children that are just an automatic adjunct of war. War is over.
After the First World War, the British established the Tavistock Clinic to study shell shock and other psychological conditions experienced by returning veterans, leading to much work and theory in the field of social and group control.
The Tavistock Institute, for example, which dealt with a lot of social engineering projects and post-World War I and World War II PSYOP, they actually studied Hitchcock films to figure out how people could be shocked in a certain way or traumatized. So in a way, trauma research and its connection to movies like Psycho, which was, you know, revolutionary for its time, that was actually studied in a scientific way. And so in that sense, mass traumatization through degradation in film or something like that we see with a lot of these, you know, really disgusting modern horror films, this kind of stuff, that was actually studied in such a fashion that it could be used to socially engineer. There's a propaganda level. There's also the traumatization level, which I think happens at a lower, deeper subconscious level through the degradation that we see in a lot of these movies, the really dark stuff at times. And what that does is basically puts people into a catatonic state. And that's done on purpose, as I said, with the studies that were done into Hitchcock films, because when you're in a kind of jilted catatonic state, you're actually much more suggestible.
At the end of the Second World War, a number of psychological warfare specialists shifted into a new field of study called communication research, with the government subsidizing much of the work being done at universities like Princeton, Columbia, and MIT. Meanwhile, the CIA sponsored the Congress for Cultural Freedom, with artists like Leonard Bernstein, George Orwell, and Jackson Pollock as symbols of Western culture and liberal expression, while artists like Paul Robeson, the black singer and actor who advocated for civil rights and peace with the Soviets, were hounded.
At that time, they were targeting great activist entertainers such as Paul Robeson, who was an amazing musician, considered one of the best singers in the world, and also an actor. And so you find that they seriously targeted Paul Robeson, dosing him with acid, for example, according to his son, Paul Robeson Jr., in a hotel in Moscow about a few weeks before he was going to meet with Che Guevara and Fidel Castro. The CIA had started a group called the Congress of Cultural Freedom. And that group was huge, gave out vast amounts of money that, in effect, in studying all the CIA documents and U.S. intelligence documents, they became America's secret ministry of culture.
In Hollywood, the CIA had assets like Luigi Laraschi working at major studios like Paramount, as well as MGM and RKO, to, in the words of psychological warfare expert C.D. Jackson, insert in their scripts and in their actions the right ideas with the proper subtlety.
There was an Air Force studio in Los Angeles called Lookout Mountain Movie Studios, Film Studios, owned by the Air Force. And they got all the major producers and actors of the time, of the 40s and 50s. We're talking about Walt Disney and John Ford and Marilyn Monroe and a number of major actors to sign confidentiality agreements that were akin to having top secret clearance in the military about the films that they made in Lookout Mountain Studio. And they made over 19,000 films in that studio.
This was a private Air Force studio that only the Air Force had access to, and they filmed some 20,000 different films, most of which we've not actually seen. There are actually archived footage, though, that I've found and put in different videos that I've made that show what they were doing. And what they were doing was actually selling a lot of propaganda through using big Hollywood stars at that time. For example, Jimmy Stewart's actually in some of the Laurel Canyon film footage.
The Air Force's Lookout Mountain Studio, atop Laurel Canyon, was officially shut down in 1968.
There are some connections, for example, that Dave McGowan has made in his book, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, where he points out that a lot of the Hollywood scene, a lot of the music scene, especially the precursor to the hippie revolution, which he titles the Laurel Canyon scene, most of those families, Jim Morrison's dad was actually an admiral. He was involved in the Gulf of Tonkin false flag incident. Frank Zappa's family actually worked at a biowarfare lab.
Frank Zappa grew up at the Edgewood Arsenal, where his father was one of many human guinea pigs for chemical weapons research. But the military wasn't the only government group experimenting on humans, as the CIA's post-war MKUltra program worked to control the human mind with experimental techniques and drugs like LSD.
When you look at the guys who studied MKUltra and who founded it and got it going, people like Gordon Wasson, they actually went and they studied indigenous groups, indigenous cultures in South America, Latin America, to find out how the shamans ran their tribes. So you could look at the CIA MKUltra guys as kind of like shamans. That was their goal. That was their purpose in promoting LSD and promoting this kind of stuff through the counterculture, through the stuff that, you know, we talked about with the Doors and Mamas and the Papas and the Beatles, the drug revolution and all that. That was largely a CIA promoted social engineering tool. So that's the real kicker here, is that it's about manipulating culture. It's not so much about creating an individual assassin. I mean, that kind of stuff does happen, you know, the Jason Bourne type stuff. But really, the big plan is to use culture to socially engineer.
I found that with musicians, there was a common theme, and what the common theme was is they got a lot of agents involved in these people's lives and influenced them to start using drugs, promoting drugs inadvertently without them realizing, you know, that why they were doing it. But then when they started sobering up, they were done away with. There was, you know, tons of ways that they were trained in COINTELPRO tactics, and COINTELPRO is the FBI's counterintelligence program that had murderously targeted the Black Panthers and other black activists as well as white activists. A U.S. congressional committee had said that in 1993 that we have to start focusing on political rappers, and it's a concern, a serious concern, that political rappers are influencing black youth to become more political. When I investigated the case of the rap artist Tupac Shakur, the FBI, I filed a Freedom of Information Act, and the FBI basically admitted to me, they said that there's over 4,000 pages in Tupac's FBI file, and I had to pay for all those pages, and then they only sent me 99 pages that were themselves redacted.
While Tupac may have appeared to be a threat because of his mainstream influence and Black Panther heritage, the targeting of political parties and opposition voices domestically has occurred illegally for years as part of the FBI's COINTEL program, And more recently, the National Security Agency has worked with the British government's communication headquarters to, quote, inject all sorts of false material onto the internet in order to destroy the reputation of its targets, and to use social sciences and other techniques to manipulate online discourse and activism to generate outcomes it considers desirable. One filmmaker who challenged the government's social engineering to control and alter human behavior was Stanley Kubrick.
What he did, I think, in the long run was throughout his movies, he showed a consistent pattern of showing MK Ultra as something very real. You see this in Clockwork Orange, where the Alex character is strapped down and he's given a bunch of drugs. This is actually detailed in the MK Ultra Dr. Ewan Cameron's work. It's detailed in the book by Dr. John C. Lilly, who's actually one of the MK Ultra doctors, how he would strap people down and give them LSD and wipe their brains, reprogram them. So what you're seeing in Kubrick films is, generally speaking, real. There is a propaganda aspect, as we said, with 2001. But when we look at Clockwork Orange, when we look at Eyes Wide Shut, these are films that I think are showing real aspects of conspiracy and how it relates to Hollywood and the government.
The Tavistock Institute's Eric Trist and Fred Emery predicted in their book A Choice of Futures, a Clockwork Orange reality where youths commit random acts of violence, then go home and watch it on TV, as mass media and television put them into increasingly dissociated states. Perhaps we have entered that dissociated state, with wars and rumors of wars echoing daily, while superheroes save the world nightly on our mobile screens.
We have been attacked. We are at war.
In 2017, luminary director Rob Reiner created the Committee to Investigate Russia with former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper, who lied to Congress about NSA domestic surveillance, and David Frum, renowned for coining the axis of evil phrase as President George W. Bush's speechwriter. Reiner chose Morgan Freeman, known for playing the voice of God, to deliver the message.
I mean, you have guys like Rob Reiner, who is associated with the ultimate of the cabal of liberal Jewish thinkers in Hollywood, and suddenly they're talking about Russia. Russia's now seized control of the new media.
Now the fashion is, you've got to hate the Russians. The Russians subverted the election, trying to destroy American values and so forth. But we heard this before in the 1950s.
From this day forward, you will become sparrows. Weapons in a global struggle for power.
You belong to them. They'll never let you go.
The most simple aspect of propaganda is just to try to kind of sell and build the brand. For example, it was recently obtained through FOIA request the influence of the Pentagon and the FBI in different shows, and this included things like Cupcake Wars. The Pentagon was involved in directly funding pro-military aspects and phrases, propositions to be added to the script for something innocuous like Cupcake Wars. And that's because, again, they're interested in culture creation and managing and steering the culture. So that's why they have to control the musicians. That's why they have to control the A-list stars, and so forth and so on. So yes, absolutely, we can see a direct parallel between movies like Zero Dark 30, which, again, totally promotes the CIA mythology of bin Laden. We can look at American Sniper, which you mentioned, which is, promoting this mythology of Chris Kyle to basically be recruitment films. That's what these are in their most simple aspect. And we know, in fact, that the CIA consults on shows like Homeland. That's public knowledge, public news.
Since the birth of Freudian psychology, the major techniques used by media to sell its product have been insecurity and sex.
By the standards of America, Hollywood is liberal. We live extravagantly. Obviously, our sex lives, as we can be seen from the recent news, are above normal, extraordinary, you would say. We spend liberally on things that seem crazy to people, to spend $1 million doing scenes in a movie, Plus, it's got an aura of fun and sin.
But one of the darker sides of Freudian psychology's elaboration on childhood sexuality is not only the increasing sexualization of teens and preteens by media, but the overt pedophilia that has been exposed in recent years from Washington to Hollywood. With former Speaker of the House Dennis Hastert being sentenced, and Hollywood celebrities like Kevin Spacey and director Bryan Singer accused.
Has anyone asked Bryan Singer, do you have settlements with anybody? Ask Marty Singer, Bryan Singer's attorney. Did Bryan Singer settle with anyone? You know, no one's asked and no one wants to ask. That's the thing. Nobody in Hollywood wants to ask the tough questions because it's going to cost them a lot of money. We're talking about the X-Men franchise.
Today we have things starting to break with the Bryan Singer allegations and the Corey Feldman allegations. And I think that Hollywood would definitely be ripe for blackmail.
Convicted pedophile Jeffrey Epstein, the billionaire friend to stars like Kevin Spacey and Chris Tucker, as well as statesmen like Bill Clinton and Prince Andrew, may indicate deeper layers to Hollywood and Washington's pedophilia that have yet to be explored.
The thing about Epstein that really hasn't come out, it's come out a little bit that he's pandered these children to the rich and the powerful, but there's been a lot of innuendo of blackmail that Epstein deployed. And actually, when the Palm Beach Police Department searched his home, there were hidden cameras in Epstein's home. Kevin Spacey and Harvey Weinstein's names are in Epstein's Black Book.
I'm not talking some weird conspiracy. I'm just talking that these people all work in circles together and they're highly organized, and people need to wake up and realize that. This isn't just a few random instances of some lone pedophile. These guys all run in the same circles, and they need to be exposed, and some of them are very powerful and very wealthy.
While Hollywood has the power to tell stories that reflect our dreams and realities, there is both a dark and light potential to such magic. The government and ruling elite desiring to influence and shape those stories should come as no surprise. But we, the captive audience, must recognize that there are deeper agendas at work. For as Raquel Lindsay predicted over 100 years ago, the art of the moving picture can replace religion with its mystical images and rousing music, wherein prophets may conjure a higher form of vision seeing.
Are you having a hard time sleeping at night, thinking, what am I going to do about my finances?
You know, times are really changing. They're changing fast. Let me give you a quick example of how. In 1920, if you had a $20 bill and 1 ounce of gold, you could go into any men's clothing store and buy an entire suit. You could buy the jacket, the shirt, the belt, shoes, the whole bit. Today, that $20 bill, what's it going to get you?
Not much.
Maybe the socks, maybe a handkerchief, but the 1 ounce of gold could still buy you the entire suit at any men's store in America. That's the difference. That's what inflation does to your dollar. It's a deflating dollar caused by inflation. Now today, that's happening faster than ever. You need somebody that you trust that can help get you out of a fake currency and into something that's going to keep you safe.
And we know a guy that has 2 PhDs by the name of Dr. Kirk Elliott. We have known him for over 25 years, and he's someone we completely trust.
You need somebody that you can get a hold of, somebody that's going to be there for you to get back out of it, and then maybe back into the stock market, maybe back into something else when things settle down. But right now is not that time. You need somebody that you trust and somebody you can call and make those worries go away.
That's exactly right. So you can go to flyovergold.com, fill out your information for a free consultation, or you can call 720-605-3900. Do it today.
You'll be glad you did.
Hey, Flyover family, we have a brand new sponsor for the Flyover Conservative Show, Heaven's Harvest. So exciting.
We've been really excited about this partnership because for about 2 years now, our level of awareness has increased on things that can go wrong in the world. Not just the big major stuff, but ice storms in Texas and things that, you know, you don't plan on. And I guess a level of personal responsibility of like, hey, we have people that we care for that depend on us. And so we've been tiptoeing into it, but it's overwhelming. It's like, what do I do next? And so we've made little steps in that process, but we've been asking everyone we know, everyone we respect in this space, hey, who's a good supplier of things? Who has food that you would actually eat if you had to, that without eating styrofoam that you'd be gagging down if you lost a bet? You know, like real actual food that if you put it away for storage, that when it came time to do it would be palatable, as well as heirloom seeds. You know, a lot of the seeds nowadays, you plant them they're not, you can't reproduce with them. You know, they've been genetically modified and really messed up. So we've been asking people we really respect. Somebody we get a lot of advice from personally, we've made a lot of small moves in our life from, is Seth Holhouse with Man in America. And we kind of went off of his lead as well as some others. And so we are super excited about this partnership because they're willing to give a massive discount to the Flyover family.
That's exactly right. When you go to heavensharvest.com and you use promo code FLYOVER, you get 10% off. What a great deal. We are so thankful and excited about this partnership.
Looks like you've been sleeping well.
Megan, he's back. The MyPillow guy.
And you're looking good.
Still feeling good.
Well, just when you thought it couldn't get any better, we've got the best pillow ever, MyPillow 2.0. When I invented MyPillow, it had everything you'd ever want in a pillow. Well, now there's new technology that makes it even better. MyPillow 2.0 has my patented fill combined with a cooling fabric with temperature-regulating thread. MyPillow 2.0 is truly the next generation of MyPillow.
The best sleep just got even better. Whether you have a MyPillow or not, you need to get the brand new MyPillow 2.0. Call or go to MyPillow.com now. Use your promo code, and for a limited time when you buy one, you'll get a second one absolutely free.
You're sleeping even better.
And cooler, too.
And you're looking good.
Feeling good.
I knew you would.
Visit MyPillow.com.
Do your feet ache and throb in pain with every step you take every day of your life? Well, kiss those days goodbye with slippers from MyPillow.com. How about that flimsy, flat little excuse for a pillow that's nothing but 8 hours of disappointment, causing you pain in your neck every single night? You can wake up with nothing but butterflies and rainbows around your head with a MyPillow pillow. Those hardwood floors hurting your old bones? No more with a MyPillow dog bed. Are your towels worn thin, flimsy, more patchy than Joe Biden's memory? There's nothing better than absorbent towels from MyPillow.com. For all of these products and more, go to MyPillow.com and use promo code FLYOVER for up to 66% off.
For more great content, go to flyoverconservatives.com.